Unaussprechlichen Ramblen.
My name is Marco Visconti, and through this podcast I will invite fellow magicians, occultists, artists, and mystics to ramble along with them and my supporters on Patreon. By doing so, I hope to introduce you all to a much wider perspective on magic than what we get nowadays from occult social media, which is frankly beginning to feel very stale, repetitive, and uninspired. If you want to be part of one of the next episodes, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Marco Visconti by pledging at the Yesod tier or above. And now, on with the unspeakable rambles. Welcome to the second Unaussprechlichen Ramblen. And for all of you actual German-speaking people out there, don't laugh at me. I'm Italian. You know that. I mess up every potential. I mean, if I can mess up a pronunciation, I will. Tonight, we are joined by Mr. Peter Levenda. And I want to thank you, Peter. Thank you for being with us here tonight in this strange virtual lodge that we've been creating over the course of the last year. Thanks to COVID, of all things. So, I mean, we got something good out of it, I suppose. For all of you who joined, thank you. And please stay muted because my ability to rein in the demons and goblins of Zoom is very limited. Also, as some of you know, I almost died yesterday. You can see from my bruise and everything. So please bear with me, okay? I'm trying to make sense of all this. The call is being recorded, and I'm gonna leave the technical side of it to Peter, not our guest, our usual Peter. And all right, so Peter, thank you so much for being here with us. And tonight, there's so much to cover, right? Because you're not just a guest, you're pretty much like a modern Renaissance man, a modern John Dee, if I may, especially given your past, help connections with the intelligence service. I often make the that I mean, it's part of your legend. I don't know.
Okay.
There's so much legend.
You can clear that up if you like.
There's so much legends that goes around you, and it was funny because I usually make the joke that usually the FBI or the CIA or MI5 listens to these calls, and I was like, maybe this could be the night that happens, right?
There you go.
Going for all the legends that go around it. Like I said, there's so much to cover, and I would say that where I would like to start is. We are a magical lodge here, like a virtual lodge, but we are. So I would like to start with the magic, and then go somewhere else, go into many other places. So I was really shocked in a positive way when I read the announcement that a new book from you is coming out with Jeffrey Evans, which was, if I'm not mistaken, it was the chief of the 10th degree of the OTO Tiphonian Order for the United States for a while. Now, just to let you know, I've been a member of many things, but I've never been a member of the Tiphonians. I know Michael Staley, I know Caroline Wise. I used to know Bill Siebert very well in New Orleans, Alabar Gray Walker. And I did speak, I did correspond with Kenneth Grant when he was alive for a long time, but I never joined. That's one thing I didn't join. So I understand that the way the Tiphonian Order works is that it's not a Masonic structure, but it works for cells. Like groups, magicians come together, they form an operating cell, and they do the magic. So what can you tell us about the Kerala cell and how this work comes together? What is going to be the rites of Mummy? I know that there's things you cannot speak about because, of course, the publisher wants the surprise to be a surprise when it comes out. But what can you tell us about this book coming out and this work you've done with Jeffrey Evans?
Well, Jeffrey Evans contacted me out of the clear blue sky. I had just joined Facebook. I had avoided joining any social media most of my life, but because of To the Stars and all of that, I was sort of obligated to be on Facebook and social media. And he found me on Facebook and said, I'm working with this stuff and this weird Crowley stuff. It's all about mathematics and Thelema. Do you understand mathematics? Or do you know a mathematician who can help me to decode what I'm working with? And I remember the name Jeffrey Evans because I had read the trilogies, and I knew that there was a whole chapter in Beyond the Mauve Zone on the Careless Cell. And I'm thinking, why is this guy contacting me? He must have a wide range of people that he could contact. But as we may know, Thelemites are basically innumerate. When it comes to math and when it comes to numbers, they know gematria, that's it, right? And sometimes not even that. So what I did, I said, okay, well, just tell me what you have. And then he sent me this material. And I thought to myself, now you got to be kidding. You're insane. You know, this can't be true. I mean, really, it was my reaction is, oh my God, it's somebody else with another weird story to tell me. And I went through and I did the calculations myself based on what he had discovered. And I was shocked to find that there is basically a kind of mathematical message buried within Liber L. It's there. Crowley had always believed it was there. He actually had mathematicians working on it. If you read the autobiographies and stuff, you know that he was working with mathematicians, but they couldn't find it. And, you know, it's given away in the first chapter when it says, you know, divide, multiply, and et cetera. I won't go into all of that. But there it is. It's right there. It's telling you what to do. And Jeffrey got to that point after years of conducting what we're calling the rites of the mummy, because that's really what it is all about. Jeffrey Evans was, and he is, remains, a fascinating individual who was for a long time a member of different other groups, one group in particular, which was the Fellowship of Isis.
Okay.
And he was a cross-dresser. So he employed the cross-dressing element upon Kenneth Grant's suggestion that he only cross-dress during ritual, and not in his normal life, not in everyday life. And Jeffrey Evans said, okay, works for me. So he was actually the priestess in these rites, and his partner, Ruth Keenan, was the priest. They had done the gender swap. And at the same time, they were employing Lovecraftian elements, Thelemic elements, Egyptian elements, where there was a kind of bondage mummification process going on. They performed these rituals constantly. They performed them on a regular basis for decades. And this is something that is going to shock a lot of people in this business, because they do some rituals, they get bored, they want to go something else, and they want to try some other rituals, and they want to try some other rituals, and they're not consistent. They don't keep magical records, as you're probably aware.
Yep.
These people kept meticulous records. I mean, huge binders, 3-ring binders, you know, that thick, of writings and calculations and magical diaries and everything else. These people were, at least this couple, was very focused. There were other members that came and left. Bill Siebert was part of that in the Americas, because Jeffrey became 10th degree and then 11th degree. And he was with other people that you've mentioned, and people who were in the States who were sort of in and out of that circle. But he, regardless of what happened to the others, he and Ruth maintained their practice consistently. And a few years after they began, they reported all of this to Kenneth Grant, and then he included that chapter in Beyond the Mauve Zone. But he didn't explore the math very well because he couldn't figure it out, right? It was kind of mind-blowing. And it only started to make sense to me when I took what Jeffrey had found and then applied it to other disciplines. And then it opened up a world. It became obvious to me what this was all about, and why Crowley had never discovered it, because this has to do more with geometry than arithmetic.
So what you're telling me basically is that this is something that has actual physical applications. Like, you can do things with this.
Yes. Number one, it's a code, so it helps to explain some of the more obscure passages in Liber L, or some of the more ambiguous passages, let's put it that way. But there is a functional element to it. So you can apply this. The reason why I think Thelemites in general haven't cottoned onto this or become aware of it is because they basically do not have the physical structures required in order to actually fully implement what this is all about. I know that sounds very obscure, and I'm sorry not to go there, but it has to do with geometry, and it has to do with the application of a different kind of Kabbalah You can think of Thelema as a New Age system,
Mhm.
taking what we know about Gematria, Notarikon, and Gemura, and then bringing it into 3 dimensions.
Oh,
And that's what this is about.
that's absolutely fascinating because something that, as one of those Thelemites that been trying to make sense of of the riddle of all for the last well, I'm 43 now, let's say 25 years of my life, and I mean I don't have a mathematical background. For me, mathematics are difficult, but I try to at least understand it to what I can. This is also interesting because I was never convinced about all the various solutions of OWL because what you mentioned, that is that in fact all the various solutions of OWL, up to and including the cipher of the UFO if we want
Sure.
to use that term, it's
Yep.
just yet another new age Kabbalah, pretty much.
Right.
It's just
Right.
another new way. I did find interesting. It's interesting that we mentioned the secret cipher of the UFOnauts, and Nathan Isaac from Penny Royal just shows up.
Mhm.
So we just have a good synchronicity right there immediately. But what was fascinating for me, on Hellier, and now we're just starting going to another direction, so because I said there's a lot to cover here, is that they were trying to use it in like to go and find places, right? Okay, let's
Right.
let's put things in the cipher and find street places. Which I mean, for me as a magician, I was like, okay, that's weird, that's wild, but they definitely had something. So
Right.
for me, if you and I'm not going to poke about telling you to ask more, but like if you're telling me that this book is going to tell us, okay, just create the structures and make practical use of that. Well, you know what? I've been waiting for that all my life. So I mean, the book is already pre-ordered. So we'll see. We'll see.
I hope I live up to your expectations.
Well, it's definitely what the appetite, as they say. Um,
Mhm.
so like have you done any of the rituals yourself, or it's more like you acted as a like as you said, like at an external like a mathematician high or something like that?
No, I was basically the interpreter. I think that's been my entire life since I was a teenager, was the guy who translates one group to another group, like the Man in Black, basically the guy who invites you into the group. And that's been my function for a very long time. When he gave me all this information, I said, I'm going to have to explain this to people because they're not going to understand it. They're going to be like me. They're going to stare at this stuff and think, what the hell is this all about, right? It's a massive numbers. And you throw numbers at people, and he does this all the time. I mean, he does this. I mean, I have massive correspondence with this guy, and there's numbers everywhere, right? Oh, I discovered this and I discovered that. And if you do this and you put this formula on this, this comes out. I'm thinking, okay, calm down. You can make any number equal any number eventually,
Yeah,
which is like the cipher of Equinox and everything else, right? You can eventually twist something around and make it come out. I said, don't lose a focus on that original discovery, which is beyond anybody's capability to deny. I mean, this is there. Let's focus on that. But I had to describe it. So the book is, the first half of it is by me, but that's only because I'm trying desperately in the first half to try to explain why this is important.
yeah.
Because I was lousy at algebra, but I
Hmm.
was an honor student in geometry. Go figure. And for some reason, geometry, I understood it. It was natural. Algebra was not. I've worked at algebra a lot since then, but geometry was a natural. And what I saw here was, this was evidence, this was proof. And I said, let's focus on this instead. So the first half is me trying to explain it. We're talking about 100 pages of me in different chapters trying to say, well, look at it this way, look at it this way, and try to understand why this is important. The next half is all his writings. I mean, his discovery, how it happened, the rituals, and all the rest of it. So I hope this will clarify things for a lot of people who are kind of resistant to the idea that there might be another level of meaning in Liber L. I'm not just talking about the famous cryptic R.P. Stovall, right? I'm talking about in general, there's an underpinning there.
Man, to be fair, that has always been the one big thing that as Thelemites we always lacked, right? Okay, we can decide.
Sure.
I mean, like we can have personal gnosis or UPG, whatever you want to call it, about why this works. But if we can actually prove that there is a proper code into it, well, that is game changer. Do you think that this is actually happening right now in this moment in time, also because of everything else that's happening right now? I mean, it's not like you work with To the Stars, for instance. Like that's like the other thread that I would like to touch immediately. Like first of all, for those of here that Don't know. Like, what can you tell us about how this connection with To the Stars? What is To the Stars, pretty much?
It's interesting that Tom DeLonge called that company To the Stars because that was Jack Parsons' name for his corporation.
Yeah,
Was To the
exactly.
Stars. And he didn't, I don't think he deliberately made that connection, but I did immediately. To the Stars is the formal network, the formal arrangement that Tom DeLonge made when he started to investigate UFOs in a very serious way. What happened was towards the end of 2014, he contacted me and said, listen, we're trying to figure out the truth behind the UFO phenomenon. And I have connections and I know people and people will listen to me. What we need to do is we need to really knock down the doors of every government agency that might be involved in corporate America and all the rest of it. We're going to do what we can, knock down doors, demand answers. And after he's finished, I'm thinking to myself, do I know this guy?
I mean,
I had heard of Blink 182.
If you knew Blink 182
No,
into the airwaves, right?
I did know Blink 182. I just didn't. I said this can't be the Tom DeLonge. That's not possible. This is some psycho. Again, I get a lot of people contacting me who are not exactly what they say. You're not surprised. So I did a little background. I said, this is the guy. He actually is serious about this. And I went back and said, you sound serious, okay? And this subject needs a lot of seriousness. There's just too much nonsense out there. If you're going to do it, I'm on board. So 2015, we started. By June of 2015, I'm sitting in a room interviewing John Podesta, right? I mean, that's the kind of connections he had. Here's Hillary Clinton's campaign manager sitting in a room with us talking UFOs, right? So I said, okay, I guess he's got the connections, right? And he went to NASA, he went to various Pentagon people and everything else. He was really creating a storm. And my function was to write 3 books that would open up this whole subject to people who were not ufologists. The whole purpose of To the Stars was not to go to the UFO people and tell them what they already know, or try to convince them that we're right and you're wrong. The whole point was to get the non-UFO people, the mainstream, to take this seriously. That was the major function of Tom and To the Stars. Let's understand what this is. Let's convince the government we're not in an adversarial position. We're not going to scream at you, Roswell, Roswell. We're not going to do anything like that. What we're going to do is we're going to just ask you questions. If you can't answer, don't answer. If you can, then answer. Just don't lie to us. Well, that didn't get very far. There were some people lying. But for the most part, everybody was honest. Everybody was tentative. But then I started to meet people like Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallée and Chris Mellon. And they were all very serious people. They wanted this story to come out. And they wanted to help us, and we wanted to help them. And so 2015, that was going on. We were getting a lot of steam. In 2016, WikiLeaks, right? And Hillary Clinton's emails and Podesta, and the whole thing is revealed. And our advisors were people who were in the military or the intelligence community. They did not want their names mentioned. They did not want to be associated, but they would talk to us on, off the record. Well, some of these people got outed because of WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
And so we went into this mode. We just shut down, for months. I mean, there was no contact. I was the only person that was contactable. And I just kept telling people, no, we're not going to comment on this. Right? But by 2017, the following year, everything started to change. And then we got Chris Mellon and Hal Puthoff on board and Lou Elizondo. And Lou Elizondo was the major figure who, because he actually worked on the UFO projects in the Pentagon. This changed the conversation, not just for the outside world. They're now taking this seriously. The New York Times is reporting this. But the UFO community now is getting really pissed off. It's like, who are you guys to come along and do this? We've had guys.
Fire, yeah, exactly.
This is our thing, man. This is La Cosa Nostra, baby. You cannot go in there and start saying, you have contacts and you know what's going on. No. So this became a little contentious with the UFO community. And I kept telling them, guys, this is not about you. This is not about the UFO community. We're not stepping on your toes. We're talking to everybody else. You can throw away your tinfoil hat now because everybody else is getting on board with this. Mm-hmm. And that was the whole purpose behind To the Stars, to get where we are coincidentally today, which is the day Congress is supposed to release their declassified report on UFOs. We got to that point, and that was what we wanted. So we've accomplished that, right? They're going to come out, they're going to start talking. And when they do, the toothpaste doesn't go back in the tube. right? There's going to be a lot of people agitating for congressional hearings and committees and all the rest of it to get to the bottom of what is possibly a national or a global security threat. So this is what happened. This was a lot of nonsense behind the scenes. There's a lot of negotiations, most of which I was not privy to. I don't have a security clearance. I didn't sign an NDA like these guys did.
Yeah.
So, you know, there were some conversations I couldn't be part of, but they did take place.
Something
So,
that has really been like incredible for me. Like as I said, I grew up with X Files, right? And I grew up with the idea that everything was denied, and
right.
we
Yep.
everything was like we were the weird was like thinking about this. And of course, I don't really have a background in UFO. I'm interested in the subject, but I'm always looked at it from a Jacques Vallée, if you want, kind of approach, right? Okay, this is another kind of magical experiences or magical connections, and of course, maybe we're gonna touch on that briefly. What I realized in recent weeks when I really started preparing to talk to you, but in general, like also talking with everybody here in the community, like how much like what the discourse is like on mainstream TV right now. Like who is on the going out speaking of the fact that they don't know if it's even if it's spaceship or no, if it's intradimensional or everything. Which of course, as magicians, we always been thinking, yeah, I mean that's what it's likely, right?
Sure.
So for me, it's like do you think there's something like in the zeitgeist of the moment, and not the terrible movie from 2008, but like something that's been happening, like almost like globally? Like think about it again, Hellier. Like they speak of this like global initiation that they found themselves into. Like, do you think something is happening, or it's just like one big synchronicity, big case, big.
Well, you know, I write about synchronicity and sinister forces, and to me, synchronicity is something like that. You can't separate the two. An initiatory process and synchronicities, they go together.
Go together.
In this case, I think there is something going on. I think that we're at a point, because of our technology, we've reached a point where we can't deny the facts anymore. We could always say that eyewitnesses were stupid, or they didn't know what they were looking at, they're untrained, and so on and so forth. That was our fallback position for the last 70 years, right? Now the Navy releases videos of the Tic Tacs, and with pilots screaming at them and freaking out over this.
Yeah.
This is the problem that the government now has. Everybody has a cell phone. We have cameras. We have all types of sensory devices. We can look at the sky. We have telescopes. We have everything else. You can't hide this any longer.
Yeah.
So we're at that point of technology where the government is going to have to, start opening up the gates a little bit, because they're going to need our input. This is the thing that I've been saying in the Secret Machines books and in the lectures that I've done occasionally to the UFO community when they're not throwing stones at me. And that is that we need everybody's input. It's not just a question of the scientists deciding what we can know, or the scientists interpreting this phenomenon. They're not equipped, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
There's not just STEM, there's STEAM in this. We need the arts, we need the humanities, plus we also need average people to communicate things that we're not looking at, that we're not aware of, that we missed. For instance, I use the idea of the sanitation engineer, a garbage man. Garbage man looking at a UFO, or as a contactee, for instance, inside a UFO, let's say. What's the first thing he's going to realize? There's no garbage cans in the UFO. There's no waste material. There's no method for doing that. That's something that we should be thinking about. Yeah. Are we dealing then with organic beings, or are we dealing with machines? Are the creatures, the aliens, whatever you want to call them, the others, are they organic? Are they living, breathing? Or are they some kind of self-replicating machine, like a von Neumann machine, and they're sitting there building themselves out of spare parts, and they keep going and going this way? Yeah. Because there is no waste material. There's no oxygen. They don't seem to have ears. They don't seem to use their mouth for anything. They communicate in pictures, which leads me to the next part of what I think is happening. The internet has created a kind of group network, a mind across the globe, which is based primarily on pictures, less than sound. It's based on text and it's based on pictures. All the contactees, and I'm putting contactees in a separate box from the nuts and bolts UFOs, and there's a reason to get to that. But the contactees always report communication happening telepathically, which means in forms of images, in forms of ideas, but not in form of words. Is the internet, the way it exists now, vulnerable to hacking, not just from our political enemies, but from an alien entity, which understands the technology much better than we do? Is this hackable? And all it would take would be a few bits here and a few bytes there in an image to convey some other kind of message. We're at the point where we need everybody on board to be aware and to try to contribute to a science of let's call it defense. Not that I think it's a threat in terms of an invasion, but in terms of our consciousness and our ideas about ourselves, in terms of our culture, we are in a position of stress. The UFO is going to present us with stress. The report will present us with a certain degree of stress. The Chinese are working on it. They've just opened their own UFO research bureau. The Russians are doing the same thing. Governments around the world are doing it.
I mean, Italy is doing it, which for me is mind blowing because
Excuse me?
Italy is doing that as well, which
Yeah.
for me is mind blowing because I mean, Italy doesn't do anything anymore. But,
Well, did you see To the Stars visited Italy actually in one of the episodes of The Phenomenon, or Unidentified it's called. There actually is one whole sequence that takes place in Rome where our people, Tom DeLonge and Lou Assange and everybody else are talking to the Italians. And they're saying, look, we've got these photographs, we have these videos. This entire town was attacked by UFOs. So yeah, I mean, this is a global thing. It's not an American-centric thing. But if Congress can open up the gates a little bit, make it a little safer for everybody not to lose tenure in the universities and not to lose their job in the corporate America, but to come out and talk about this seriously, I think, you know, it's To the Stars has accomplished a great deal.
I mean, I'm definitely with you. And the big problem, as you said, is not talking to us, like people that are open to the idea, but
Right.
talking to the average Joe down the road that is still maybe. And there's also a big problem, you know, with religion, right? People that very early
Yes.
religion in a traditional sense, what
Sure.
this gonna mean for them? Like what's like the Child's Hand by I don't remember, right? It was by him.
Arthur C. Clarke, right?
That's it, yeah, exactly. The
Yeah.
actor Clark. I mean, that book. It's something we should do at some point as a book club with you, with all of you guys, because it's a fantastic book and it really speaks of this pretty much.
Right.
Something that I would like before actually going to one of the questions from Stevens, actually a couple of questions from him because touch on this. One thing I want to like to ask you is like I think you correctly mentioned the fact that you know and let's say the others, whatever they are, I agree with the idea that these entities, this intelligence can easily hack into our consciousness through the ways you've been mentioning. And
Right.
it's actually what happens, you know, in fairy abductions events, or I mean, we all know what you're talking about. Do you think it's like you mentioned threat? Do you think it's only negative, or do you think that we actually maybe we should let them in? We should let them as like, you know, do their magic on us if you want.
Talking from a magical perspective, would you do that? Would you open up a magic circle to something you've summoned and say, come on in?
Well, the things I've done a little bit. No, that's yeah. I guess that's a good point.
And it's not because of a threat. It's not because that they have evil intentions.
Mhm.
If they're so different from us, they may not understand what we would consider a threat.
Yeah.
They may not, their ideas of life and death may be completely different.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't fear death at all. Maybe we're still scared shitless of death, right? So maybe they say, no, that's no big deal. We can kill you. You'll be fine. You know, I mean, so there's a problem with the threat is to our way of thinking. It may not be to our physical selves, but it will be to our culture. And the problem is we have a global culture to worry about. We have different cultures, different languages, different religions, different perspectives. The UFO is out there as something outside of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we all have to be on the same page. We are on the same page where this is concerned. There's stuff flying around in the skies that we can't control. So we're all going to react to it differently. And we're all going to react to it in terms of how do I protect myself, my ego, let's say?
Yeah.
How do I protect, you know, who I am against this? Is this a challenge to my religion? Is it a challenge to my language? Is it a challenge to my culture? You know, in Apocalypse Now, they said, Charlie, don't surf, right?
Mhm.
The problem is the aliens don't sing, you know? Maybe they don't have music. Maybe there's no faculty for appreciating music the way we do. Is that going to be a problem a little bit later on?
Yeah.
You know,
I can
these are things that we have to address. We have to think of alternates, and we have to project ourselves into these very dark, mysterious areas and prepare ourselves for another reality.
Thank you. Now, this is definitely food for thought. I'm going to pass on to one of the questions now, and this was Stephen. And there's a series of questions. So the first is relates to Secret Machines Man, where you state that if you want to get a glimpse of the alien, sit quietly in a darkened room. You will feel something assuming form around you, or before you, or behind you. And he asked, if you can elucidate on this. Is this an actual protocol for contact, and how did you learn it? But before you answer, I'm asking, is this connected to the Austin Osman Spare quote, right? That you're never alone in a darkened room?
It was in the back of my mind.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was connected to something else at the same time. I met a famous ufologist called Timothy Good, a British ufologist, some years ago. I was invited to give a talk, I don't know why to this day, in Amsterdam to a secret space program conference. And I had no idea what to talk about because I was not Mr. UFO, right? But they wanted me to talk about it. So I brought together a bunch of disparate things about UFOs in American history, dealing with from about World War II, but especially the Kennedy conspiracy and the connections to weird people who were involved in the UFO stuff in 1947, who crop up in New Orleans in 1968 during the Garrison probe. So all of this I was doing, and Timothy Good was one of the presenters there as well, and we got to know each other. And one night we spent in his hotel room. We split a bottle of scotch. We actually drank that bottle dry between the two of us, which I'd never done before. Never drank a half a bottle of scotch in one sitting. But then I was never in rock and roll. But so Timothy is telling us about telling me about various things. And either he put it in a book or he just told me directly. But he said, just try this. And I've been looking for it. I think he wrote it down somewhere and I can't find it. But he said, do this. Go to a crowded place like a shopping mall or an airline terminal, and just sit, pick a seat and just sit there. Compose yourself, take a deep breath, relax, and just send out the message, I'm here, where are you? And then open your eyes and see what will happen. He says, always there will be somebody who somewhere in that crowd is going to turn around and look at you and smile. He says, you've made contact, right? To Timothy, they were all around us, they were here. They just were in and out. They were not little green men or Greys or Nordics. They were just people that looked like us when they wanted to, I suppose. So that stuck in the back of my mind. And then I had an experience myself before this, years before. I was living in New England, which is like the heart of, Lovecraft country, really. And you think West Virginia is bad, go to New England. And in New England, in this town, I had just come from shopping. I was unloading a cart in front of my house in a small town in Rhode Island, in the middle of nowhere. And an old black Cadillac pulls up right in front of the house, not in the driveway yet, just on the highway outside. And somebody, the driver, aims a camera at me, a wide angle lens. Now you're in a place that's rural, it's not like you can do a Bobby De Niro, you're looking at me, he is looking at you. I mean, this is what's going on. So I said, what the hell is that? I put down the bags and I ran over to the car, but the car speeds off before I can do anything. So I think, this is absurd. Who is this? So I jump in my car. I'm going to back out of the driveway and follow the car. When another car pulls up, and this is an old station wagon with the wood trim on it. I hadn't seen one of those things in years, at least as old as the Cadillac. This car blocks me from leaving. And two women get out of the car to ask me directions. Nobody does that. You don't get out of the car to ask directions, right? You just roll down the window. They got out of the car and they were dressed in these old clothes, like old cloth coats and everything. They looked like two little Manson children, and it was just weird. And they asked me for a specific name. And I said, no, I'm irritated because I want to follow the car. And no, I don't know anybody by that name. And they smiled sweetly, got back in the car and left. And of course, by that time, it was too late for me to follow the Cadillac. Okay, fast forward. I'm living in Malaysia. I'm going through the airport in Singapore, in Changi Airport. And I'm dragging my ass through the airport and I'm dragging my suitcase. And it's been a long flight. And then somebody taps me on the shoulder. And I turn around, I'm in business, it could have been anybody. I turn around and it's one of those women. And they smile at me and they disappear. And I go off after them, but I can't find them again. All right. So that was my Men in Black episode, or I don't know what it was, right? But I was not studying UFOs. I was not looking at UFOs. I had no UFO contact experience that I know of. And this happened right around the time of the first Gulf War, right? So we're invading Kuwait and Iraq, and we're doing all of this. So I'm thinking, is there an intelligence thing to this? And I started to ask people, and they said, 2 cars, 4 people for you? No, don't think so. Nobody would make that investment unless they really knew that you were building a bomb in your basement or something. But otherwise it didn't make sense. But that stuck with me for a long time. So this idea of just being quiet and look around, I think, has resonated with me when Timothy said it, and then I sort of repeated that to other people.
I mean, at the end of the day, I often tell everybody here that the way to start to do any magic is to sit down, close your eyes, and start breathing. So thank you for confirming that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
The second question, again from Stephen, and of course it's still on this topic, is what are your thoughts on Stephen Greer and the CE5 protocol? Is it a protocol that people should practice to establish a contact with the others, or maybe avoid?
You mentioned Stephen Greer. You had to do that, right?
I mean, okay. Wait for when we start talking about the Necronomicon.
Okay. Well, we're just out of time. So. Okay, Stephen Greer. I kind of dissed him a little bit in one of my presentations at a UFO conference, Contact in the Desert. But I did it in such a way that unless you knew who I was talking about, it wouldn't have mattered. Stephen Greer, to me, he has this very open idea about the aliens are all angelic and beneficial and don't worry about it. To me, that makes him, let's say, the Blanche Dubois of ufology. Blanche Dubois, Streetcar Named Desire. What's her famous line? At the very end, she's being dragged off by people who are taking her to an insane asylum. And Blanche Dubois says, whoever you are, I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. Stephen Greer is depending upon the kindness of strangers. And he thinks the aliens, the strangers, are going to be kind and nice to him. But look what happened to Blanche. They took her to an insane asylum. So my feeling about all of this is to be very, very careful. CE5 is potentially dangerous. CE5 we used to call ceremonial magic, right? We used to go out in the woods, in the nature, and summon spirits. But we did it with protections. We did it with prayers. And we did it with magic circles, and we were prepared to do it. We went through a period of training first. If you were lucky, if you were somebody like me, you had no training, you just did it, and this is the result. But
no problem, trust me.
It was A.E. Waite's book on ceremonial magic. That was my introduction, right? That'll screw you up, believe me. So this is what happens, right? So if you're going to go outside, just open yourself this way. You need people around you. You need the protection of other people, So the Gadarene swine, maybe the devils will go into them instead of you. But something, just to go out there and say, come on down, I'm ready, I'm available, to me it's dangerous. Like mediumship is dangerous, potentially spiritualism, that sort of thing. I believe in protections, I believe in training, I believe in getting ready for it, Sitting quietly in a room is nice just to get the feeling and just to get that sensation, and to know that you're not alone, even in an empty room, as Austin Osman Spare said. So that's what's valuable. But when it comes to CE5, and it's been monetized as well, and it's been turned into a thing, I'm kind of not predisposed towards CE5, and I'm not predisposed just to thinking that any alien is okay. You have to be really careful about what you're doing. Maybe you're not going to be summoning aliens. Maybe something a lot darker shows up. You don't know. You're not prepared. You can't defend yourself psychologically or emotionally from what might happen.
I mean, something that I often say here on this community is that I studied with Michael Berthiaud, and Michael Berthiaud often speak of the good UFO, the bad UFO experience. But
right.
he insists very, very sharply on the fact that you can turn everything into a good UFO experience if you are prepared, like if you are trained. Yeah, the thing about the Greer's approach is just, of course, it's all about the Sedona people and that kind of new agey, but everything is good. I'm with you. That's what I'm definitely with you. Final question here. It's an inquiry about Secret Machine War. Is it written, and when can we expect it to be released?
Damn, we're just out of time. I'm sorry. Okay, the thing with the Secret Machine War is the same as the Secret Machine novel, the third novel, and Andrew Hartley's. We're both waiting for the green light because To the Stars went through a reorganization because of COVID. COVID really did a number on us. It did a number on our government connections as well. We couldn't get stuff that we needed out of talking to people in the military or whatever, even in manufacturing and, skunk works and all this other stuff. The people we were talking to and dealing with, everything kind of ground to a halt. So that gave us a problem. That delayed everything. I believe Secret Machines War could come out at almost any time. Has it been written? Sure. Has it been rewritten? Sure. Have I, changed it here and there with new stories coming out? Yeah. I would like this to be over, please. I want this book off my desk. But it's still there, and I'm still ready to go. When they give me the go-ahead, they get it. And once they get it, they can turn around really quickly and put this out. So Secret Machines War is ready. I've been teasing bits of it here and there. I've been thinking I should say something here and there about it or about things that I've already discussed. But I'm being careful not to blow my relationship with publishers, as you know. So yes, it's ready as soon as To the Stars gives us the go-ahead. And To the Stars has become now more entertainment focused now because we've lost, like I say, a lot of the military intelligence people that we were talking to and trying to get involved in different projects. Because of COVID, all that's kind of slowed down. So we're focusing now on the books. Tom's doing movies. He's doing a tour. As you know, all of this is going on. Angels and Airwaves is going on. So there's all kinds of stuff is happening. So as soon as they can breathe, they're going to put out the books, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Well, we're gonna wait for it. We're gonna go on to another question now. So, by the way, thank you all for would send the question in and make my my hosting job much easier. So thank you all.
Yeah.
So this question is from Dara, and if you can get your question, Peter, on your thoughts on the rumors of the Tibetan monks with green gloves allegedly in Berlin during the Nazi era. I mean, this is it's a big traditional history about whatever happened there.
As you guys may know, I first got into all of this with a book called Unholy Alliance. And I had researched that book all over the place. I'd researched it in South America and Europe and the United States. I was turned on, like everybody else, by a book called Morning of the Magicians, which is a really fascinating book, but it's filled with all kinds of stuff you can't verify, right? But there's enough teasing in there that made me want to go and know more. Were the Nazis involved in occultism? What was this Tibet connection? What was that all about? What I was shocked to find is that all these popular books being written on Nazi occultism, nobody actually bothered to look at the Nazi records themselves, which I found bizarre. I went to the National Archives, and they have a huge section called Captured German Documents, which is what they captured at the end of the war. And they're still in German. They're just microfilms of hundreds of thousands of documents, right? And I went in there looking for just this information. And a very nice guy, the curator of that collection, Mr. Dr. Wolf, said, "Oh, you want to look at the records of the SS Ahnenerbe?" And I said, "Okay." And he led me right there. There's reels and reels and reels of microfilm on the Nazi Occult Research Bureau, the Ancestral Heritage Research Division. And it was all there, the trips to Tibet, the studies of runes, of paganism, Nordic paganism, of the whole, it's all there in their own words, their own documents. Himmler signing this with the Heil Hitlers and everything else. I mean, it was just a massive amount of information. And I'm there plugging quarters in and copying pages as quickly as I can. There just was not enough money in the world to copy all of this, right? But I got as much as I possibly could. Then I realized the Library of Congress had an whole other section, of documents on the same thing. So I started to do that research, and one thing led to another. I went to Tibet House in New York, which is kind of a lot of celebrities have financed this. This is to promote the Dalai Lama and everything to do with Tibet. And they gave me the phone number of Robert Thurman, a very famous Tibet scholar, who's famous also for being the father of Uma Thurman. So I went and I called Robert Thurman, who was annoyed to hear from me. And I was asking him about, certain specific things the Nazis had taken out of Tibet. He was very short with me and tried to get rid of me. I knew that, but it's okay. That's what you do, right? So I wrote down everything religiously. And I researched the Tibetan angle a great deal. I didn't find any record of Tibetans with green gloves anywhere. Were there Tibetans in Berlin at the end of the war? Probably yes. The SS did conduct an investigation, an expedition into Tibet, 1938, and they came away with a lot of material. They actually came away with an entire set of the Kangjur, which is the Tibetan scriptures, all 108 volumes on the backs of donkeys or something. They came back with flora and fauna. My impression is they must have brought back some Tibetans with them to help them analyze the material, particularly the scriptural writings, particularly the Kangjur and whatever else they took out of Tibetan documents. There might have been Tibetans in Berlin. That makes sense to me. Tibet was kind of not really at war with England, but the relationship was not close, and Germany was trying to put a wedge between England and Tibet because the British had India, and on and on and on. It was the great game again. So it's similar to the way that it was presented in Morning of the Magicians, that there was this Tibetan element, but the reality is much more interesting. And years later, when I was in Indonesia researching this whole Hitler had escaped to Indonesia thing, I did come across in Singapore and Indonesia an address book, the actual physical address book, that was held by a Nazi doctor living in exile under an assumed name in Indonesia. And that address book contained Heinrich Harrer's address. Now, Heinrich Harrer was 7 years in Tibet. This was the guy played by Brad Pitt in the movie. He was a German SS officer, a mountaineer, a rugged kind of explorer who wound up in Tibet just as the war started. And he stayed there as the Dalai Lama's sort of tutor and assistant and everything else. What was not so well known was that this guy was conducting correspondence everywhere. I mean, this address book dated back to Austria during the war years. And they had Heinrich Harrer's address in Lhasa in this old address book, you know, with an SS marking on it. So here's this doctor, a medical doctor, a guy responsible for God knows what atrocities. He's now living in Indonesia. He's dead. His documents wind up with someone else who then gets passed over so I can see them. And I'm looking at them. I'm thinking, what the hell? Heinrich Harrer was like conducting, he had pen pals while he was in Tibet. I thought the place was closed off, but it wasn't. He actually was obviously in correspondence. So all of these things are, you know, what we think we know, we don't know. And evidently Heinrich Harrer himself was considered to be working as an espionage agent by a lot of even his own friends thought that he was a spy, whether he was a spy for CIA because they were trying to keep the communists out of Tibet, or a spy for the Nazis during the war. I mean, God knows. But
so there's definitely a connection there.
There absolutely is. And I haven't found the green gloves, but I did find Tibetans. So.
There's like one more question, and then maybe Nathan wanted to ask a question as well that it didn't send before. Like, this is from Jonathan, and I guess we've been touching on the fact that it seems like if we look at everything you wrote over the years, that there is like almost like a fil rouge that binds them all. Like, is there a theory of everything behind what you're writing?
Basically, yes. There is. I always considered my books to be individual chapters of one big book that I'm writing. Mm-hmm. So I don't consider them divorced from each other. They're all connected. They're all talking about some of the same ideas. Fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter. So I'm writing about the Nazis in one case, or about, you know, alchemists and Thomas Vaughan in another case, or I'm writing about, you know, in the Dark Lord Crowley and Lovecraft and Kenneth Kenneth Brandt. I was going to say Kenneth Unger. That's not quite the same, but I've connected all of these, and I do find this is all part of the same story that I'm trying to tell. In Sinister Forces, I hint at this a little bit when I talk about synchronicity and coincidence. For instance, the Kennedy assassination for Americans is like the big ritual moment of the 20th century history. It's like the sacrifice at the center of it. And, you know, it was predicted by Maurice Maeterlinck, a Nobel Prize winning playwright at the turn of the century, before Kennedy was even born. He writes about a grassy knoll. He writes about a president who's assassinated by somebody whose name is Alec. Lee Harvey Oswald's, you know, name was Alec Hidell when he was buying, you know, guns through the mail. I mean, and we don't know if he was working in the play, if he was working for Russia or someone else. The whole story was there. Yeah. And then someone else wrote a novel about the Texas Tower sniper, getting everything correct, including the name of the police chief who would do the investigation. And this was published 10 years before there was such a thing. So to me, I found myself in the middle of this morass where there's the actual facts, there's data, there are conspiracies, obviously, we know it's on the law books, but there's also weird stuff that goes on. And the weird shit and the real shit interface in ways that we can't really understand, but it's still there. You know, and in my own life, I was 18 years old, 18 years old in 1968, which tells you how old I am. Sorry about that. You can delete this later. So I turned, 18 in October of 68. Okay, there you go. And that summer, that was 1968. That was going to the war. That was Vietnam. That was the Tet Offensive. That was everything. That was all the assassinations, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, on and on and on. It was a horrible, horrible time. And yet I get involved with a weird church in the Bronx where I was born. And this church, run by a weird Ukrainian guy who was a priest in the Ukrainian church and started his own church and blah, blah, blah. Little do I know at the time that I'm hanging out with these people and trying to get cover, basically, for a church that I had created out of whole cloth just to stay out of Vietnam. Okay, long story. But I didn't want to go to Vietnam. I didn't care about too much the military or anything. That wasn't the problem. The problem was Vietnam. I didn't want to go and kill Vietnamese people. So I said, I'm not going. And I didn't want to go to Sweden and go across the border to Canada. A friend of mine and I, we sat thinking about, how do we do this legally? And I came upon the idea, well, legally, they can't draft clergymen. Well, we don't want to go to a seminary. We don't want to join the Catholics, because we don't want that kind of training, if you know what I'm saying. So we said to ourselves, I said to myself, we could legally create our own church. And he said, seriously? And he said, yeah, let's create our own church. That's all. We just go and incorporate it, make ourselves priests, and they can't draft us. I was sort of naive, but basically that is what happened. So we create this church, but then we get adopted by another church. I'm making a long story short, but this guy was running a front, a domestic intelligence operation. I didn't know it at the time. I'm too stupid. I'm 17 years old. I'm 18 years old. Our church gets sort of subsumed into this church because we had all the robes and everything else. We looked real. We looked really real. We rode on buses for free all over New York. Okay, we were real. Turns out this guy, the key members of his church were people like David Ferry and Jack Martin. Now, if you watch the movie JFK,
yeah,
with Kevin Costner in it, David Ferry was played by Joe Pesci, and Jack Martin was Jack Lemmon. These were real people. They were considered to be involved in the conspiracy to kill the president. Jim Garrison was convinced that they were, and so he hauls them in. He's trying to question them, trying to find out who knows what. And it turns out, as Garrison would later tell the House Select Committee on Assassinations, check into these weird churches, man, because I don't know what this is all about, but there seems to be a connection here and I can't figure it out. And it turns out when I finally got the documents a few years ago, I'm going through and thinking, oh shit, this is all signed by the guy who brought me in. This is the church I worked for. Jack Martin was really like a co-brother of mine in the church, right? And here was the head of the church asking Jim Garrison to please release Jack Martin, let him come get it. I mean, it's all there, right? Now, I'm a kid, a teenager. I shouldn't, and this is part of the problem. When I write about the things that I know, people accuse me. They say, you've been a disinformation agent for years. And I said, since I was a teenager, seriously? Where's the check? I mean, how did that happen? How can you be a disinformation agent when you're a teenager and you're an idiot? And all you're trying to do is stay out of the war. So it turns out I knew all these people. I knew Jack Martin, indirectly, but I knew his boss. Yeah. And then later I interviewed bishops who had known Jack Martin. I have photographs of Jack Martin dressed as a priest, right? I put that up online from time to time. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you get involved with without attempting to. Yeah. So if I'm not part of the conspiracy, obviously I'm not, then what is this all about? Why am I always getting involved with these people? I went to get a job once in Queens. It lasted for 3 months, but the guy sitting next to me was one of the people involved in the Watergate thing. He was a friend of E. Howard Hunt. And he's somebody that journalists have been looking for years, but he was keeping a local profile. And he told me everything. He just sat there in the car one day and just talked to me about all this and introduced me to the organization AFIO, the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, right? So, and
I think we
shows me this, and we're talking about all this. And he was stationed in Singapore. He spoke fluent Mandarin. And I went once to Singapore when I was living out there just to look up this business that he started, this front company in Singapore. And it existed in their files, right? But they didn't have the records to give me that moment. So I went to my hotel, and my hotel room phone rings. Someone says, "Are you Peter Levenda?" And I say, "Yeah." "Oh, this is the what do they call it in the state house, or where they keep all the records?" And they said, "We, sorry, we don't have any records on this company that you're looking for." And they hung up. And I said to myself, how the hell did they know where I was staying, right? So it's this kind of stuff, and you get in the middle of it, and you tell people this, or you tell people that the guys at To the Stars, or Michael Aquino. I met Michael Aquino, right? Hung out with him in Las Vegas for a while, with a whole bunch of spooks. I mean, he was there with the intelligence officers, all these retired guys who loved him, right? They had respect for Michael Aquino. They thought he was a great guy. These were all intelligence officers, that had known him for years. They wanted their picture taken with him.
So basically, you're
So
definitely
you get involved in this.
you're telling us that there is a big picture out there for everybody.
There is a big picture.
I would like to segue this. I mean, I don't know if Nathan.
We're in it. I can't see it.
I think this is a good moment to segue into Nathan. If Nathan is online, I'm gonna try and unmute you, Nathan, because I knew that you had questions for Peter. I mean, Nathan is doing a lot of research on Pennyroyal, and Pennyroyal podcast is connected to Hellier, and Nathan is actually going to in a direction very similar to where you are, whatever you've done. So I'm just gonna leave it to Nathan, and then maybe go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Peter. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay.
Hey, Peter. Nice to meet you, man. Yeah, just a couple quick questions. One of the things that we recently came across, been talking to Adam Gorightly quite a bit. A lot of our research has overlapped with some of the James Shelby Downard research. And James Shelby Downard has a lot of Kentucky connections, which was kind of a strange thing. He went to college about 30 miles north of where I'm at right now. So a lot of strange things, but some of the there's obvious connections with the Hellier stuff and with some stuff we're researching that involves Pan. Right. William Grimstead's Rebirth of Pan was a major point of intersection, right? And so we've been researching some of this stuff, and Adam Gorightly and I have been talking to Rick Spence, who did the Secret Agent 666 with Crowley and a lot of stuff like that. Yeah. So Spence is a big Downard researcher, but I say all this because there's a weird intersection with Michael Hoffman, right? That that Downard, could be a literary, invention of Hoffman and Grimstead to push some of their rather controversial ideas, right? And so that's been one of the intersections, and we have some weird connections here in Pulaski County to the Bait Cabal, who emerged from New York City and ended up in Cincinnati, publishing the Cincinnati Journal.
Sure.
Magic.
Know them, yeah.
So a weird intersection with all of this was that Hoffman, that there were individuals who supposedly were channeling entities in the 1970s in New York City that were part of the Bait Cabal, and that Hoffman may have been a member of the OTO groups that were involved in this. And because of an experience I think he would have been 17, 18 years old at the time. If his date of birth is not correct on Wikipedia, but timing wise, it would have been about that time, because Grimstead says that the Sirius Rising tapes, that what's available is only the first of 9 tapes, and the other 8 tapes also involve recordings of channelers, supposedly. So I was just curious, have you've had researcher, you were aware of the Bait Cabal? Is that anything that you've ever come across in your research?
Cabal would be operative in New York in the 70s, and that's when we had the Warlock Shop, Magical Child, and that whole occult renaissance thing exploded around it. The people who later became the Bay Cabal that went to Cincinnati were people that I knew, but they were teenagers at the time. So they were part of something called Pagan Way initially, because they were considered minors. They couldn't bring them into the regular witchcraft covens and circles, especially not the Gardnerians, because they were sky-clad, right? So you couldn't have a bunch of naked people running around with a bunch of minors. I was going to make a bunch of very bad jokes, and I'm not going to. But suffice it to say that this group was separated for the kids, right? But these are very serious people. They were very seriously involved in their studies. As far as channeling entities, that's entirely possible. They would have probably been doing the same kind of things that when I was a teenager, I was looking to do, picking up books on this sort of thing, on table tapping and magic and all of that, and trying to make it work. Hoffman, however, the Bait Cabal is one thing. Michael Hoffman being a member of it, it's not something I would have remembered unless he really stood out. I kind of remembered Robert Carey and a few of the other people who were there because I knew them, I interacted with them. Hoffman is a different story. He would not have found the group that congenial, I think, because these were pretty much hippie types, would be considered that way today. The most right wing they would get would be like Tolkien novels, so that's like as far, to a Nordic mythology system that they would like would be, Lord of the Rings. So there was no real, I don't think they belonged, they didn't join the regular OTO in New York, the Tahuti Lodge at the time, which was considered, there was a big break. It's a long story, but in the late 1970s, there was a major rift between the Caliphate OTO types who wanted to create a Blue Lodge OTO, and they were very doctrinaire, and they wanted to go full on a sort of authoritarian. And there's a whole other group that said, no, we don't want any part of that. We're Liber Oz Thelemites. We're not Blue Equinox Thelemites, So there was this fight between these two groups. Hoffman, I don't know where Hoffman would have fit in a group like that. He might have been libertarian enough to like the Liber Oz people, but he was authoritarian enough to like, the Tahuti Lodge people. So I don't want to put words in his mouth. I knowingly have not met Hoffman. I might have, I just don't remember. But I've read one or two of his books, and they're pretty scurrilous from my point of view, and not really based on solid evidence, but more like an ideological position that he's taken. And that, so I kind of shrugged that off. But I don't remember ever actually having met Hoffman. But the Bait Cabal, sure, they were very far-thinking people at the time, even though they were teenagers, but they were really aggressive about learning more. They created their own newsletter, Mandragore. They were doing all this other stuff, and then they moved off to the whole NEMA thing in Cincinnati and Cincinnati Journal. So they really, from my point of view, made a real name for themselves. They really did go out. But I don't think Hoffman would have fit in that group, quite frankly. That's my reaction.
I'm gonna. Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Peter. I'm gonna just like interject on this, and then we're gonna start like almost closing remarks. Maybe there's time for one question from me, a couple of questions actually. And first of all, since we discussed about the Bait Cabal and Cincinnati Journal of Magic, and then eventually NEMA and Lyrus and Math Magic. In Math Magic, one of the fundamental concepts is the collective soul of mankind, Naton, that counts in the eon of math, whatever. Now, would you say that something like that it's similar to the kind of intelligences that are contacting us now? Do you think that this idea that this collective, almost hive mind of a species can be similar to what is actually happening to us now? And could it be that in fact, who's contacting us now is us from the future? If it makes sense.
At this point, it all makes sense. Well, okay, if we're connecting, I try to put these in separate boxes a little bit, which is not very useful. It's just only useful as a place to start a discussion. But now we have to bring these boxes together. So now we have things that are flying around the sky, which are nuts and bolts maybe, right? These are physical things because we can photograph them. They appear on radar, sonar, when they go in the ocean, all of this. We know these are real things. They seem to have consciousness because they anticipate what we're going to do. They anticipate so much that in the case of the Nimitz tic-tac thing, one fact of that stuck out and pertains to your question, and it sticks out so much that nobody really pays attention to. And that is that when these Hornets, these jets, the F-18s were out there up in the air, and they were doing these maneuvers, and they saw these things, and the things disappeared.
Yeah.
And then they were told a computer generates a set of coordinates in the air for these jets to rendezvous. It's called a CAP.
Yeah.
And they're told to go and rendezvous at this point. And as they're preparing to rendezvous at that point, they get a call from the commander on the vessel saying, "You guys are not going to believe this,
Yeah.
but all those UFOs that you saw, they're waiting for you there. They're waiting for you at the place that a computer algorithm generated a set of coordinates in the middle of nowhere. They knew ahead of time, and they're waiting." That to me was the single most monumental aspect of this thing, not seeing them flying around. We've been seeing them flying around for 70 years in the modern age and for thousands of years historically. It's that they knew where we were going to be before we knew it because a computer had calculated it. And this is what I mean about now there's a consciousness aspect that we really didn't want to deal with, but now we have to deal with it. There's a consciousness aspect to the nuts and bolts guys, and to the guys who are saying they were abducted by aliens. There's now a kind of threads of continuity between these two groups, that there's a consciousness aspect to it. Now, is this real consciousness, or is this some kind of super artificial intelligence, a super AI system? That these things that we see are drones. They're there to collect data. They're there to collect information and send it back to the freaking mothership, God knows. But no matter what, it's crossed over into consciousness for us. And as we develop more AI, as we develop our systems, as we explore our science more, we have to keep in the back of our mind that these guys are already there and they're waiting for us, right?
Yeah, that's terrifying when you put it like that. Like, and as everybody knows here on the call, I'm usually the reckless one saying, "No, let's do this. Let's do that." That's terrifying when you put it like that. Thank you for the sobering moment. One final question from me. Are you Simon of the Necronomicon? Come on, I had to do this.
Everybody has to do this. I did an interview with the Buckland Museum a little while ago. Same thing,
Come on, you know it was coming. I cannot.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. You read the Lovecraft Code trilogy.
Yeah.
Those 3 novels that I wrote. It's given away in one of the novels.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pay attention. There's a character called Simon in the novels.
Yeah.
And what does he say about being Simon? He says it was not a name, it was a title.
I can see I can see what you're hinting at here.
Simon is a word with 2 meanings from Hebrew. It can mean he who listens or he who is heard, depending upon how it's used. So I leave it at that.
Well, I think this is the best question we could get. So, Peter,
Yes.
this is all for me. I don't think there's any more question. Like we covered a lot of ground here, and honestly, all of us here, we want to thank you for being part of this virtual experience. And that's it. Do you want to add anything at all? Because I was going for the podcast later on.
Well, I think that you've really covered a lot of ground in this.
Absolutely.
And as I warned you, I can talk a lot. So,
Well, you warned me, and I could listen to you forever. I think we have one final question, like the last one from Steven, and I'm going to ask him to unmute him and go ahead.
Thank you very much. Peter, I just want to say thank you for the work you've done for ufology. I love your books. But I want to just ask for a little bit of detail. So I've read your notes that To the Stars Academy put out, and there's a reference to a teleconference with Tom DeLonge from 2016, and it says Roswell crash - Nazi craft.
Right.
So but then the rest of the information in your notes is there's no context. So I'm thinking, what did Tom say to you? Was it a Nazi crash, or was it an actual ET craft? What is it?
Of our advisors, this was taken at the time when we had about 10 people very highly placed who were feeding us information. Some were feeding us allegories, trying to get us to come to the truth without actually revealing anything. Others were blatantly telling us stuff that there were times when I didn't really believe what they were saying. And I'll get into that a little bit in Secret Machines War. But I had difficulty with some of the stuff that I was hearing that I knew had to be wrong, that somebody was playing games. And usually these guys disappeared after a while. They didn't stay. They didn't become part of the group that we later formed. But yes, there's a whole section in Secret Machines War. I mean, there's chapters on this because I felt it was really important to cover it. That there was a lot of speculation in the military that what had crashed was the Horten lenticular craft that had been a Nazi-designed craft, but that was being built in the Soviet Union.
Mm.
So there was this idea that there were a lot of Nazi scientists. Well, we don't really realize. We know Paperclip. We brought over 1,000 scientists to the United States to work on our space program, but the Soviets had thousands more that were working at bases all over the Soviet Union, captured German scientists, and they were really focused on the exotic weaponry and the exotic craft. So they wanted to build the next generation of the V2s, V3s, and on and on. They wanted to build the Horten designs. They wanted to build all kinds of anti-gravity stuff. We know now, because of the fall of the Soviet Union, more documents got released. We know the names of some of the players on the Russian side now better than we used to. So I've been putting together a lot of data based on my own background studying the Nazis, and the fact that there was, in 1945, just after the end of the war, the US Congress released a report that nobody seems to remember anymore, which contained the names and addresses of thousands of Nazi corporations that were expatriated in 1944. So the Allies would not get a hold of them. And all over Latin America, all over Europe, North America, everywhere. And that's just the ones they knew about. So the Nazis had expatriated a lot of assets, financial, technical, and human, outside of Europe, outside of where they could be captured by the Allies, to keep that war machine going so that they could come back into Germany once Germany would rebuild. But then there were also thousands of scientists, I mean thousands, something like 3,000 Nazi scientists wound up behind the Iron Curtain, most in Soviet Union, but some in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia at the time, and other places where they were working on different projects. So the possibility that something crashed in New Mexico that might have been designed by the Nazis and maybe built in the Soviet Union was a real possibility to the military at the time. They were freaking out. And there's a lot more documentation than we know of the military freaking out about flying saucers in 1946 and 1947, thinking that these were Russian-made, but Nazi-designed.
Fantastic. Once again, Peter, thank you so much, and good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.